Who are you? Tell me about your role and who do you work for?
My name is Peter Zaitsev. You can think about me as a portfolio entrepreneur those days. Specifically, I'm well known as a founder of Percona, and now I'm also involved as a co-founder in Karoot.
What are three emerging Kubernetes tools that you're keeping an eye on?
I will not even try to be unbiased answering this one, right, and mention some project I have something to do with, right, which I'm pretty excited about. One is Percona Everest, right, which is a project which is currently and better, which provides you pretty cool GUI similar to Amazon RDS and stuff to run databases on Kubernetes, right, kind of some GUI on top of operators, open source, of course. The second one would be Karoot. With Karoot, we just recently released the first GA version, so it's also pretty emerging tool, and that can provide pretty good, easy to use observability for Kubernetes. And the third one, which to mention, is the project Victoria Metrics. It is not like specifically Kubernetes specific tool, but that is kind of like very efficient Prometheus replacement, which I think is very important those days as we have Kubernetes clusters going larger and larger, and that means, well, more and more telemetry needs to be stored and stored efficiently.
One of our guests, Steven Sklar, shared that you can and should run databases on Kubernetes. The tooling and practices have matured since Kubernetes began, and you should run stateful applications there. What's your experience and advice when it comes to running stateful applications in Kubernetes?
I think he's right. I also see what that is an uphill battle because of that, like an early days Kubernetes story, what Kubernetes is designed for stateless application. And I think many people still hold to that, truth of state 8 years ago. At Percona specifically, we have operators for all of the databases we support, and we have a very large customers running some very serious workloads on Kubernetes, and that works pretty well. Now, what I think is important, though, is you need to exercise proper care, because Kubernetes still can play kind of pretty fast and loose with your pods, right? And if you don't configure it properly, right, don't configure how you deploy your database properly, right, you can lose your data, which is, well, quite unpleasant.
One of our guests, Matt, shared that most teams store logs and metrics in Kubernetes without considering the implications of the data they collect. Consequently, they end up paying a hefty price for data that is not actually used. What's your advice on ingesting, storing, and querying metrics in Kubernetes?
I think this is true, right? It's very interesting. And besides, beyond Kubernetes, right, you hear about folks which have almost as much infrastructure supporting the, collecting and processing the telemetry for the main application, right, as we have that main application, right, which is, absolutely bizarre. I think there's two things. Like, first, you need to be selective. Don't store all the stuff just because you can. And the second one is you need to also make sure you use proper technologies, state-of-art technologies, which allow you to store that efficiently. Right? It's some people may not understand, but there is probably like at least 10x difference between storing your logs in a last generation systems, right, as well as what is the most optimized modern systems, with good compression, new vectorized processing techniques, right, and so on.
Now, regarding cost optimization ARM instances, one of our guests, Miguel Benarvello, shared that Adevinta migrated their Kubernetes cluster to support ARM instances and workloads because they are more cost effective. Do you have any practical advice on reducing your Kubernetes costs?
I think moving to ARM, that can be good cost optimization, right? I think especially if you look at cloud vendors may like to make the ARM instances more cost attractive for performance. Of course, the good choice is if you can, because not all software is either supported or well optimized to run on ARM, right? So your mileage may vary. Now, I though also would not have it as a sole solution, right? Because you can have ideas like say, well, I will waste a lot of resources. It just will be cheaper resources. I think it's with Kubernetes cluster, it's very important to right size, right? So you don't really run a lot of Slack, as well as have basic practices. In so many cases, you have, developers live in, some instances which they don't use, right, or some other stuff which is forgotten and not needed, right? Having a good policy what you only run the stuff which needs to be run in Kubernetes and what that is appropriately optimized is, I think, where majority of managers.
Kubernetes is turning 10 years old this year. What should we expect in the next 10 years to come?
It's hard to make predictions, especially about the future, right? Isn't it? But I think what is interesting here is, I think over 10 years, we have been able to build a lot of stuff in Kubernetes, right? And I think you can see increasingly amount of people saying, well, oh my gosh, Kubernetes is kind of very complicated. There can be like a steep learning curve, right? And I think what there over the next 10 years, Kubernetes should and it can to focus on being easy, right? Maybe building some of frameworks on the top of a Kubernetes, right? So that all the Kubernetes complexity can be hidden for users who don't need it.
What's next for you?
I just got recently involved with Kahoot as a co-founder. So really building and growing this project, is the next thing for me.
What's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
You can get in touch with me by email, peter.zaitsev@gmail.com.